Feel like the guys who were playing with you over there were messing with you. Good morning, church. I'm so happy that you joined us today as we are launching our new sermon series on the study of the letter of First Thessalonians. And in order for us to understand the letter of the First Thessalonians, before we talked about the letter, we need to understand of what was happening. So I don't know how many of you have read First Thessalonians before. It's a very tiny, very short letter. There's a Second Thessalonians, which is, I think, even shorter. And in order for us to understand what was happening in Thessalonians, we need to start with this passage. Passage in John 15:20, where thousands of years ago, Jesus comes into the picture. Jesus comes to the earth. He's preaching. He's getting disciples together. And he says, hey, by the way, before I leave, I want to let you one thing. I want to let you know one thing. And one thing I want you to know, that if you're going to be my disciple, if you're going to be the disciple of Jesus, if you're going to be my follower, here's what I want you to remember. And here's a promise for you. Now, we know a lot of amazing good promises that God leaves for us. This one is a little bit heavy. This one's a little bit hard to accept. This one's a little bit hard to receive. But here's a promise that Jesus leaves for his people before he leaves the earth. In John 15:20, he says, remember the word that I say to you. A servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. Bam. Nice. Sweet. Great promise. You guys excited? Those of you who are disciples of Jesus? Yeah. Whoa. Wow. Yay. And since those words, the persecution has been happening and has been ongoing against the people who follow Jesus, who make a decision to follow Jesus. From Nero to Marcus Aurelius, from Stalin to Mao, up until today, when persecution is still happening in various different countries. According to the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, in 2020, Christians in Burma, China, Eritrea, India, Iran, Nigeria, North Korea, Pakistan, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Syria, and Vietnam are persecuted. These countries are labeled countries of particular concern because of their government's engagement in or toleration of severe violations of religious freedoms. And we here in the United States know everything about religious freedoms, right? The religious freedoms is something we fight for. Religious freedom is something we're very proud of here in the United States. Religious freedom is something that we always talk about whenever somebody says something about closing the church for a lockdown or a mandate of some type. And we're like, religious freedom, right? But here are a few countries that do not have something like that, and where their countries and governments are actually engaged in violating those religious freedoms. The same report recommends that places like Afghanistan, Algeria, Azerbaijan, Bahrain, the Central African Republic, Cuba, Egypt, Indonesia, Iraq, Kazakhstan, Malaysia, Sudan, and Turkey constitute the U.S. Department's special watch list of countries in which the government allows or engages in severe violations of religious freedom. And since the words of Jesus are true and powerful, and since his promises, all of his promises come true, this promise came true right away as well, when he said, the servant is not bigger than the master. And as his servants, he promises that because he was persecuted, you will be persecuted. Why am I starting this way? Why am I starting with this heavy, kind of hard realization of, oh my goodness, we are so glad that our government is not openly attacking Christianity? Or are they not openly attacking Christianity? You know, oftentimes we think of persecution as something that's happening out there. Persecution that's something that's happening in these countries that I just listed from the United States Department of State. We're thinking of some physical pain, some imprisonment that's happening in all these countries, this harsh persecution, and it is happening, and it is sad. But I want to tell you today that we are actually also experiencing a persecution in this country. Except it's not as open as some other countries are. Except it's not as evident as it is in other countries. And it is actually very similar to what the people in the city of Thessalonica were experiencing. It's actually very similar to what the people who read the letter that Paul wrote to them, they were experiencing a similar type of persecution that we are experiencing today. What is that type of persecution? Let me tell you that a little bit later. Let's talk about Thessalonica. Let's talk about this interesting city with a very interesting name. Thessalonica is a city in was a city in Macedonia. It is still a city in today's Greece, right? And you can see it on this map. It's right here. There's actually no red dot on this one. Never mind. I think it was like an arrow. There we go. There's Thessalonica right there next to Philippi. So it's in today's Greece. It's a major city at the time when Paul visited Thessalonica. Population of about 200,000, which today might not seem like a big city because Fresno itself is like 600, right? So it's a third of Fresno, but for that time period, it's a very big city with a big population, known at one point as the Mother of Macedonia, the capital city of Macedonia. So a very special name, named after Alexander the Great's sister. So has some status, right, in the society, has some status in that area. It is located on one of the main east-west highways. It's connecting the Western world to the Eastern world, and it's a place of trading. It's a place of having the ship ports, right? It's a very important city, and it is to this city that Paul comes with some of his teammates. Paul comes with his teammates to the city, and he begins to preach about Jesus to the people who've never heard about Jesus, to the people who've never heard about this new movement of Christians. And in 50 A.D., Paul comes to this city, and he preaches to them. Later we find out that Paul describes the church in Thessalonica once it is planted. Paul describes them in his letter in the 1 Thessalonians that you are my pride and joy. I don't think he's ever spoken to any other church like that. If you compare his letter to Thessalonica with the letter to like Corinthians or something like that, it's such a big contrast. He sounds so proud of Thessalonians. He sounds so joyful for them. You are my pride and joy. What is it that made this church so unique and so special to Apostle Paul? And how can we reflect a church like that, where people would be saying, House of the Gospel is the pride and joy of Christianity. House of the Gospel is the pride of joy of any preacher or any pastor that has ever been here. So let's meet these Thessalonians and how they meet Jesus for the first time through the preaching of Apostle Paul. Before we even read 1 Thessalonians, today I want us to go to the book of Acts. So if you have your Bible, please open it to the book of Acts. If you don't have your Bible, I encourage you to bring it with you. Maybe pull it up on your phone. I think there are a few Bibles maybe in the back of some seats, but go ahead and have a Bible open in front of you so that you can follow along, not just the screen, but also in the book itself. The book of Acts, which is after the Gospel of John in the New Testament, chapter 17. Book of Acts, chapter 17. This is the first time that Paul comes to the place called Thessalonica. And he meets a few people there. So let's read this first interaction between Apostle Paul and the Thessalonians. Now, when Apostle Paul had passed through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, where there was a synagogue of the Jews. So they're traveling. They're going from the city of Philippi, and they're going to Thessalonica. And they come to the city, and they go straight to the synagogue. In verse 2, we read that Paul went in, as was his custom, and on 3 Sabbath days he reasoned with them from the Scriptures, explaining and proving that it was necessary for the Christ to suffer and to rise from the dead, and saying this Jesus whom I proclaim to you is the Christ. If you have a hard copy Bible, if you have a Bible that you don't mind marking in, I would encourage you, mark this, highlight this phrase right here. This is his main sermon, Apostle Paul's main sermon theme, topic that he is preaching to the people in Thessalonica. This is the main theme that we preach here in this church, that Jesus, whom we proclaim, is the Christ. The end of verse 3. And some of them were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas, as did a great many of the devout Greeks, and not a few of the leading women. But the Jews were jealous, and taking some wicked men. Okay, so there's another group of people. Some Jews who did not accept, and they became jealous, and taking some wicked men of the rabble, they formed a mob, set the city in an uproar, and attacked the house of Jason, seeking to bring them out to the crowd. And when they could not find them, they dragged Jason and some of the brothers before the city authorities, shouting, "These men who have turned the world upside down have come here also." And Jason has received them, and they are all acting against the decrees of Caesar, saying that there is another king, Jesus. And the people and the city authorities were disturbed when they heard these things, and when they had taken money as security from Jason and the rest, they let them go. Wow. Just 9 verses. Just 9 verses, and you already see this interaction that Jesus has with, that people have with the gospel through Apostle Paul. He comes in, he goes into the synagogue, he does the right thing, he spends 3 Sabbaths with them, and he teaches them this simple message. Jesus is Christ. It's a simple message, but it's a very powerful message. Jesus is the Christ. Why is it so important for Apostle Paul to explain to the people in the synagogue that Jesus is the Christ? Because the people in the synagogue, they were waiting for Christ. They were expecting Christ to come. They were studying the prophets of the Old Testament. They were studying the scriptures of the Old Testament. And they're saying, man, there's a Messiah who is supposed to come. And Christ is another name for Messiah. And they're like, there's Christ who's supposed to come. There's Messiah who's supposed to come to free us, to give us freedom, to give us this new life, this different life, a Messiah that is promised by God. And Apostle Paul comes into the synagogue and he says, Jesus is the Christ. He already came. He already is the one that you are waiting for. And remember, you heard about this Jesus guy being crucified a while ago? He is the one. It's interesting how Paul approached this. There's 3 things I want you to see in these few verses that how Paul did it. He reasoned with them. When you look at the original word for reasoned, it's like it sounds like dialogue or something like that. The root word for dialogue. Paul had dialogues with them. This is why it's so important that we continually say, hey, join a community group, join a group of people where you can have a dialogue about the scriptures. So Apostle Paul comes into Thessalonians, he comes into the synagogue, and he begins a dialogue with them. He reasons with them, and he explains to them. So how important it is to know the scriptures. You cannot explain something you do not understand. And Paul begins to explain to them, this is how the Old Testament shows that Jesus is the Christ. And part of that explanation was mentioning that Jesus had to die and be resurrected. That is the important message about Jesus. That he didn't just come and go. That he didn't just come and create chaos and leave. He came, he died, and he was resurrected. He came, he died, and he was resurrected. John Stott, one of the Anglican theologians, says the following about the importance of resurrection in Christianity. He says, Christianity is in its very essence a resurrection religion. The concept of resurrection lies at its heart. If you remove resurrection, Christianity is destroyed. And this is what Paul says. I proclaim this Jesus to you, who had to suffer and who rose from the dead. And he explains this to them. And he's telling this to them. And finally, he uses proof. And he's proving it to them. And as I was reading this and I was thinking about it, I wonder, how was Paul able to prove to the people in the synagogue that Jesus is the Christ? And I wonder if Paul maybe shared his own testimony. You know, one time I was walking on the road, I was going to kill some Christians, and Jesus showed up to me. And he changed my life. This is how I used to be, and this is how I am now. I wonder if Paul used that as proving that Jesus is the Christ. So I want us to see this, and I want us to kind of remember this approach that Paul uses. Have a dialogue with someone. Know your scriptures and be ready to explain your faith. And have a personal testimony. Share your testimony with someone and tell them that Jesus is the Christ. The last thing I want to mention about this idea that Jesus is the Christ, it shows that Jesus is the only way. The reason why it was so important for Paul to stress that Jesus is the Christ is because he is the only way. There's no other God that gives you forgiveness. There's no other God that gives you eternal life. There's no other God that rules your life. There's only one, and that is Jesus Christ. A few people accepted the message of Christ. And we see this group of people who have accepted the message that Paul had. Some of them were persuaded. Who are these some of them? The some of them refers to some of the Jewish people who were in the synagogue. Some of the Jews were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas, as did also a great many of the devout Greeks, and not a few, meaning there were quite a few leading women who joined the ranks, who joined Paul and Silas, who believed. Why would Luke, who is writing this, describe these different groups of people? Why didn't he just say, and out of everyone who was in the synagogue, quite a few people believed and joined? But he decides to list different groups of people who did believe and join. It's the Jews, the religious people. It's the Greeks, the importance of other nationalities. It's the other nationality. It's the group of people who do not associate with the Jews. It's the Jews. It's the Greeks. It's the women. It's the prominent women. I think what Luke is trying to show here is that there is something special that happens when the gospel reaches the hearts of people. When the good news of Jesus reaches the people, is that it reaches all kinds of people. The good news of Jesus disrupts the categories and the systems of the society. And it says prominent people can be together with non-prominent people. Women can be together with men. Rich, wealthy, and poor. Greeks and Jews. Different nationalities, different races can be together, and God wants them to be in the same family. I think Luke underlines this very specifically, and he says that the gospel of Jesus Christ is counter to the culture. The gospel of Christ counters the culture. The culture separates. The culture gives categories. Culture and the society makes boxes. And Jesus Christ says, I'm not in a box. I cross cultures. I counter the culture. I cross nationalities. I come across ethnicities. I come across gender. I come across income levels. It doesn't matter who you are and what you're doing and what your profession is. Jesus Christ is for you. He saves everyone, and He wants salvation for all people. I think the people in Thessalonica became countercultural right away. I think their congregation became counter to the culture right away. You know why I think that? Is because all of a sudden there were people who found out that there's this group of believers. There's this group of people who joined Paul's movement. The news about Jesus brings a change into the Thessalonian society. All of a sudden, what was normal is not normal anymore. All of a sudden, the social norms of a society are disrupted by the coming of the gospel. The way they did things, the way they understood things is disrupted. The way they saw people in different types of people is disrupted. Their understanding of life is disrupted. And that is exactly what the Bible teaches us to be like. The Bible teaches believers to be counter to the culture. Not to go with the culture, but to go against the stream of the culture. Tim Keller, in his book, Loving the City, describes Christians who live in a community, and he calls the Christians to be a certain way. He says Christians are called to be an alternate city within every earthly city, an alternate human culture within every human culture, to show how sex, money, and power can be used in non-destructive ways. The culture, the society tells us that all these things it leads us to say that all these things lead to destructive ways, and he says we are to show how these can be used in non-destructive ways. To show how classes and races that cannot get along outside of Christ can get along in Him. And to show how it is possible to cultivate by using the tools of art, education, government, and business to bring hope to people rather than despair or cynicism. As we're going to study the letter to Thessalonians, the first letter of Thessalonians, I want to repeat this theme this passage, the part of passage that Paul tells them. He says, "You are my pride and joy." And one of the main reasons why Paul says that you Thessalonians are my pride and joy is because all the pressure you're facing, all the troubles you're facing from the outside culture, you are staying faithful to God. You're staying faithful to the gospel. You're staying faithful to Jesus Christ. That's why you're my pride and joy. But in that being faithful, you're not separating yourself from the society. And people seeing your faithfulness are joining the kingdom of God. And this is really the type of church that I would love for us to be. A church that doesn't go along with the culture and the society, but actually provides a different way and a different angle and something different for the society to see that there's something better, that there's something that does not lead to destruction but leads to life. There's something that does not lead to despair but leads to hope. All of a sudden, this first group of Christians in Thessalonica notice the counter-cultural life of Thessalonian church, and they begin to go against them. There's another group of people here that we read in Acts chapter 17, verses 5 through 7. This is a group of people who became jealous of those who joined Paul. There were some Jews who were jealous. Taking some wicked men of the rabble, they formed a mob, set the city in an uproar, and attacked the house of Jason, seeking to bring them out to the crowd. Jealousy creates this enmity towards the believers, towards the message of the gospel. Jealousy is not a new phenomenon. Jealousy is a specific tool that Satan uses to push back against God. Jealousy is something Satan had when he rebelled against God. Isaiah chapter 14, we read passages that describe what Satan did, and it says, Isaiah says, "For you said to yourself," he's speaking of Lucifer, he's speaking of Satan, who said, "I will ascend to heaven and set my throne above God's stars. I will preside on the mountains of the gods, far away in the north. I will climb to the highest heavens and be like the Most High." This tactic has been used by Satan from the very beginning and is being used today to sway people away from God, to move people away from God. He uses jealousy with this group of people to push back against the gospel, to push back against these group of people who are believing, this group of people who have believed and start to follow Christ and start to follow the gospel. And he uses two tactics. So they become jealous and they begin to use chaos and confusion to disrupt what the gospel is doing. Check out what they're doing. Again, I want to repeat verse 5. The Jews who became jealous, they went to the market. Okay? Another translation says they went to a marketplace, not the VBS marketplace. Okay? They went to the marketplace and they found some wicked men. New Living Translation says they gathered some troublemakers. And what did they do with all those troublemakers? They formed a mob. They formed a mob and they started a riot. So these words right here that we see here in verse 5, wicked man, mob, city in an uproar. What kind of mood is happening? What is happening? There's chaos. There's confusion. There's probably things being destroyed. There's probably people being very confused and running around and trying to figure out what is happening. They're probably yelling. There's a lot of commotion to the city. The New International Version says that this was a group of people who were the bad characters. When the gospel enters the city, Satan uses confusion and chaos to try and disrupt the power of the gospel. In addition to that, these men begin to twist the truth. And they say in verse 6, when they couldn't find Jason, when they found Jason, when they couldn't find Paul and Silas, they dragged Jason out. They were shouting. They were angry. They brought him to the city authorities, and they said, "These men who have turned the world upside down," well, a little bit of exaggeration there, "they have turned the world upside down, have come here also. And Jason has received them," even though they didn't find them with Jason, "but he has received them, and they're all acting against the decrees of Caesar, saying that there's another King Jesus." And while they're not wrong, but they are exaggerating, because nothing in the message of the gospel says that you need to go and overthrow the king. And if you know anything about the writings of Paul, Paul actually oftentimes says, pray for your authorities and your rulers. Pray for your kings. Paul has never promoted, the gospel has never promoted overthrowing political regimes. But here they are twisting the truth and throwing a city into chaos and confusion. Chaos and confusion is one of the main tactics that Satan uses to attack the gospel and to try and distract people from receiving the good news. And this is where I want to come back to that very few initial ideas or thoughts that I had about persecution. I think the society today here in the United States is being persecuted by chaos and confusion. Satan is attacking our society today by sending chaos and confusion. Why are there so many people confused about who they are in their gender? Am I a man? Am I a woman? Is there something else? Why are people confused about that? That is a tool that Satan uses to distract people from the gospel. Why is it so hard for people to understand and to know where the life begins of a human being? Why is it that people begin to argue about these things? It's not necessarily because people are such bad people, but they are being guided by Satan's attacks of chaos and confusion. You know, the most concerning opposition that Christianity is experiencing today in our culture and society is the opposition that comes in quietly, slowly seeps into the church. And we can talk about Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan, and whatever other stand country where these crazy persecutions are happening, where Christians are being dragged out of churches, being jailed, imprisoned. But the scary part is the persecution that does not happen openly like it is happening quietly here today. Just recently I read a statistic that took a survey of 1,000 Christian pastors in the United States. And they found that out of the 1,000 Christian pastors, only 37% of them actually hold a strictly biblical worldview. Less than half pastors in the United States who call themselves Christian actually hold a biblical worldview. Most of them, 62%, possess a hybrid worldview known as syncretism. Basically, a fusion of different systems of beliefs, mixing philosophy and religion, mixing social feelings with faith, mixing truth with people's feelings. Syncretism. That's the scary part. That Satan uses chaos and confusion even within the church. And he tries to confuse church leaders. He tries to confuse Christians and tries to tell them that there is no one truth. There is no one way. There is no way where you can feel this peace, right? You need to live in this confusion. You need to be guided by what you feel and how, in your emotions and what you think and how you understand. That's what Satan did when he tempted Eve the very first time. And he said, did God really say that? He tried to confuse her, and he succeeded. So what do? How do we live in a society that constantly experiences this confusion? There's lack of peace. There's lack of calmness. What do? It's very simple. We go back to the message that Paul said in the very beginning of his meeting with Thessalonians. He says, Jesus, whom I proclaim, is the Christ. Jesus Christ offers an alternative to chaos and confusion. Jesus Christ offers an alternative to chaos and confusion that we are in. And he offers peace and truth. When there's peace in your heart, there's no time for chaos. Peace covers chaos. Truth covers confusion and takes care of confusion. Because when you know the truth, it's very hard to confuse you. When you know the truth, it's very hard to tell you, to kind of spin that truth in the way that will throw you off that path. In chapter 14 of John, Jesus promises these things, and he says these things. He says, I'm the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And he promises peace, and he says, peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you, not as the world gives to you, do I give to you. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let them be afraid. Chaos, confusion, fear, troubled hearts. Is that what you're feeling today? Do you feel like you cannot just face the life today because of all the craziness that is happening in your life, of all the chaos that is happening in your heart, in your mind? If that is the truth, you need to receive this peace. It's not the promise that everything around you all of a sudden will calm down and be peaceful, and your kids will be quiet forever and be obedient to you, and you'll have a peaceful life. It's the peace within that God will give you. That even though you live in a society of chaos and confusion, Jesus says, you internally can have peace. That when you turn on the news, it's not going to bother you because you have that internal peace. When you hear about another individual going off track and going farther away from God with the decisions that they make, you're not going to freak out and you're not going to get mad because there's peace that Jesus gives you. Are you confused? Are you confused about who you are? Are you confused about what you should be doing in life? Are you confused when you hear different messages from different sources coming at you? If so, know that Jesus is the truth. And we believe that this book is the book of truth. And the more you spend time in this book, the more you spend time focusing on Christ and asking Him to change your life, the easier it will be for you to know the truth. Jesus offers peace and truth. He wants you to have it, and not to only have it, but to share it. This is the beauty of what the gospel does in the lives of people. It gives peace into our lives, and it uses us to share this peace with others. Apostle Paul talks about Thessalonians, and he says, you are my pride and joy. I hope and pray for everyone who's present here today and whoever is listening to this service today. May God work in your hearts, and may He bring peace into your heart, and may He show you the truth through His Word, so that He Himself may one day say, hey, Bob, you're my pride and joy. Because you've been faithful to the truth, and you've also shown this alternate life to those around you. May God bless you. Amen. Would you bow your heads with me, please, as we pray? If you are feeling confused, if you do not have peace in your life, if Satan is using chaos and confusion to distance you away from God, this is a good time to pray to Him and to ask in the name of Jesus, Jesus, please fill me with the peace that you give. Fill me with that special peace that no program, no project, nothing in the society can give me, but you can only give me this peace. Lord, we want to know the truth. We want to walk in the truth. And we know that you are truth and you offer this truth. So I pray, Lord, with the church today that you show us the truth in our lives. And help us to not only know about this truth, but to receive this truth and to walk in this truth. Lord, help us to be this counter-cultural church that doesn't only look Christian, but acts Christian. So that people looking at us will say, I want to have peace that she has. I want to be stable in the truth that he believes. It seems like it gives him life. It seems like it gives her life. Help us to be those who with our actions promote the truth and peace to those who surround us, in our workplace, in our school place, wherever we vacation, wherever we eat, wherever we spend time with friends, with family, with relatives. May your truth and peace radiate from our lives. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Let's worship together.